I will be speaking a bit about the emergence and functioning of authoritarian regimes following Miklós Haraszti. I think he set the tone perfectly, and I will be the one digging a bit deeper. I will have several disclaimers because I am not a political scientist, so there you are. Why am I doing this? That's a very appropriate question. After my rather grim and depressive 40-ish minutes of a presentation, we will open the floor to questions and comments. And after that, we will have a coffee break. I'm looking at the organizers, but they are not telling me no. So yes, you can get coffee in about 1 hour from now. And after the coffee break, we'll have a wonderful colleague, Stefania Kaproncai, who will be sharing a lot about what exactly can civil society do and give us concrete examples for resistance and promising and inspiring practices. So, who am I? I told you I'm not a political scientist. My name is Júlia in Hungarian, Júlia in English. I am Hungarian. I've been working with 2 NGOs in Hungary in the 13 years of my civic human rights defender quality here. Hungarian Helsinki Committee and Amnesty International Hungary were my 2 homes. And then I left the country, I moved to the Netherlands, and currently, actually for 6 years now, I have been with the Dutch section of Amnesty International, pretty much continuing what I've been doing here. I work a lot with Polish, Hungarian, and Serbian civil society to work on their resistance and resilience, yeah, we'll be talking about that more. So I'm not a political scientist. The title may actually be misleading. I do have a bit of an imposter syndrome. So I would encourage people who do have a deeper, knowledge in the field of political sciences to come forward towards the end when we have space for comments. I will be speaking from a perspective of lived experience. As a woman born and raised in Central Eastern Europe, I think I do have some things to say, but maybe others are, better placed to complete what I will be telling you. Yes, this is a mind map of what we're going to do. We'll be starting from the middle. Let's see if the pointer works. Oh yeah, it works. So we will be checking who are we in the room because it's a very diverse group. We'll be talking a bit about the goal of this session, and then I'll walk you through some of the key symptoms of autocratization. Many of them were already mentioned by David and Miklós before me. We'll be looking at the trends from some of the main research agencies and organizations. I'll talk a bit about the authoritarian playbook, and also what we feel in our daily lives. So what is the experience we share, most of us in this room? And then I will be hopefully closing with some examples for hope from home. So it will be examples from different sections and colleagues from Amnesty International that were very promising and inspiring. Who are we in the room? So just to wake you up a bit, I like to do this kind of rather interactive parts. Can you please raise your hands if you are Hungarian in the room? So if language and culture, oh wow, it's kind of like almost the majority, but something like half. Great, so then I guess the rest is non-Hungarian foreigners, great. Who are you, the ones who are working in the civic sector? So you are professional NGOs, like human rights defenders paid for your job. Okay, it's quite the majority. Do we have activists? So those who are volunteers who have another job. Okay, well, that's much less, but still, we do have activists. Some are half-half, great. Part-time is also something to consider. Do we have academics? So researchers who do research for a living. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay. Do we have diplomats, so those who work in international relations? Okay, I see like 2 very happy colleagues raising their hands. Great, welcome as well. And well, I must ask, but I don't know if it's realistic. Do we have anyone from like the public sector here? Were they ever invited? I don't even know. Okay, nobody, great. So it's only us, fine. That's the usual setup. I wanted to ask this because actually the understanding of how these regimes work can be pretty different from where you are, like whether you are living in a country which is kind of a semi-authoritarian regime or hybrid regime, or whether you are elsewhere in a more developed liberal democracy, and also where you work, if you're an activist, or whether you are a researcher. What my role here is to bring us to a common understanding. So I will try to be comprehensive. I will use mostly plain language. Also because that's more comfortable for me, but I do hope it's also more comfortable for you. And for anything else, if you want to dig deeper, I'll mention some books. We do have some researchers and scientists in the room, so please feel free to approach them or consult these books and authors. Yeah, people can be reaching out to the others during the breaks. Please do that. The goal that we are facing here, that we're trying to achieve here, is to have a good basis for the rest of the conference. So from looking at where we are, how to characterize these authoritarian regimes or practices, hopefully that will be a basis to hear much more about what inspiring examples we see all over Europe, Eastern Europe, to defy these trends and to create resistance in creative and exemplary manners. We saw who are in the room, but there are many more outside of the room. This is an image from this year's Budapest Pride. You can see it's huge. There are lots of people who are outside of this room who also crave respect, equality, and change. So whatever we do, we want to work for them as well, to include them, to elevate them, to work together for change. So let's not forget that whatever we discuss in our bubble, as Miklos has already mentioned, there are lots of people outside of our bubble as well, although probably the participants of Budapest Pride are pretty much still in our bubble. But the aim is to get a bit beyond, to talk to more people, to see their struggles. That's the very chaotic word cloud. If we talk about authoritarian practices or autocracies or illiberal democracies or controlled or managed or defected democracies, as you can see, there are many, many different words. And I will not dig deep into the semantics, the differences of which, term is for what exact features, which author or expert describes this one way or another. What we can see is this is a very heavy and prominent research topic in the past decade or so, decade and a half, and we have competing notions. I will pretty much use them interchangeably, and if it was an academic lecture, a proper one, then I would be probably criticized a lot for that, but I hope you will not mind it. Whenever I use one of these terms, I mean a regime which is somewhere in between. This is a scale probably from a very hard dictatorship, hardcore, violent repression, to something which imitates the features of an electoral democracy, but does have several flaws in the system to make sure that it's always the one in power who will win the next upcoming elections. So this is my scale, and I will be using these terms more or less. Okay, I promise you to dig a bit deeper into the common symptoms, the commonalities from Venezuela to Russia, or from Hungary to China or Turkey. What we see is a very clear pattern of the erosion of democratic institutions. This is something that a lot of us have already seen and witnessed and heard of, basically denying the basic principles of liberal democracies, such as the separation of powers, and hereby tilting the balance between different branches of power and state institutions, very clearly mocking these democratic institutions and principles, exploiting crisis. That's also a feature we can see in most of the countries that are struggling with increasingly authoritarian regimes. This can be economic, this can be migration related, or like the refugee crisis, what we've seen following the war in Syria a decade ago, for example. This is very typical of trying to make use of these external circumstances. We do have a separate group of symptoms, external factors that actually do contribute to autocrats or semi-autocrats increasing their international collaboration. So they do have to be aware of some of the world economy, some of the trade agreements, but also there is a lot of examples or a pattern, what we can see where these autocrats help each other out. We will dig a bit deeper into what I mean by that, or what the authors mean by that. And last but not least, a very, very typical phenomenon, which we can see in Hungary, but also in Poland or Serbia, just to name a few, but probably most of the countries that we mention, is the state capture. What do I mean by that? State capture is when the democratic institutions are rotted from within. So party loyalists are appointed and state institutions are used for the benefit of the leader or the party ends and not for the public good and the public benefit and the improvement of lives. I don't know if you recognize this image, but it's not very far from here. And if my information is correct, we will be hearing more about the resistance in Serbia. This is one of the images from Belgrade just over a year ago. The massive demonstrations started. It's a major challenge to the system where young people, students speak up and self-organize together with other groups of society. I promised you some trend analysis. Again, we're scratching the surface, but that's what we can do in these roughly 40 minutes. This is the measurement of Freedom House. And that's one of the most depressing part of my session, because for like 19 years in a row, we've seen like there is a decline in global freedoms. So for 19 years, there are more countries in the world where freedoms are deteriorating than countries where freedoms are getting stronger and more livable by people. This is up to 2024, but I think the picture is quite clear. There is a real, very serious challenge to civil liberties and freedoms in the world. This affected last year more than 40% of the global population, the decline itself. Now, this is VDAM, another type of categorization. You can spend days just what I've done last week, like, getting deeper. You will always come up with a different map, with a different figure. This one shows us what the share of world population living under or in autocracies or authoritarian regimes. It changed from 49% in 2004, and in 20 years, this increased to 72% of the world population living in these regimes. It is very sad, and I think if we just try to realize the sheer number, it's almost 6 billion people in the world living in regimes that can be considered autocracies or autocratic. We do have a lot to discuss in the upcoming day and a half, I believe. And the third one, which is the Our World in Data collection, also from last year, shows how democracies are, what's the state of democracies in the world. This is like a collection of estimations regarding several aspects of when we can consider a system democratic, like, are there free and fair elections? Are people enjoying their civil liberties that the constitutions would grant them in theory? Can people participate in politics? Do they have a functioning government that serves their interests and acts on their behalf? The worst score is 0, the best is 10. Guess what? Norway is leading this compilation. I think we have colleagues from Amnesty Norway probably in the room. Yay! Congrats! I mean, to your system or government, but you too as well, I guess, because you're a part of it. It's almost, it's more than 9.8. We do have Netherlands, Germany. I collected just a few. It's a super long list with all the countries listed in the world. I think it's interesting to see how the Czech Republic, Czechia, is pretty high on the list with a score above 8, leading ahead of France. Also, Slovenia is a former communist or socialist country, is pretty high, reaching almost 8, 7.8 is their score. And then Poland, Slovakia, and then with Hungary starts a quite nasty group or like problematic group. Hungary is just leading a bit ahead of Brazil, followed by Bulgaria, Serbia, Romania, Ukraine, Georgia, Turkey. And then on the bottom of the list, because I've mentioned, it's a scale. You can see Myanmar not even reaching 1. I mean, it's not a huge surprise. But of course, the usual suspects of Iran, Belarus, and Russia, Saudi Arabia, and China, Venezuela are at the bottom of this list. There, you pretty much cannot really talk about hybrid regimes anymore, although the classification of Russia keeps changing with yet another assault on human rights from Vladimir Putin, but still, this is like the bottom. You can see how vast this field is. Why does this matter, how we live, what our perception of democracy is? Because democracy shapes how we actually can express our ideas and opinions. It really talks about how the governments respond to our needs. So when we can express, what are the responses? Is there a dialogue? In most of the countries at the bottom of these lists, there is hardly any chance for dialogue. Those in an upper segment you do have. Where democracy thrives, people enjoy their freedoms, dignity, security. It's like there are like a lot of research suggesting that there is a clear correlation between prosperity, satisfaction with life. You can see all these value surveys. And yes, there you will see most of these Scandinavian countries pretty top on the list. Not saying there are no issues there with, legal legal measures or political challenges. Of course there are, but like how we live, that is pretty much affected by how democratic the society we live in are. Where democracy breaks down, people often face instability, oppression, and increased injustice. So that's just the frame we're talking about. Now, two of our great, I don't even know what to call them. I don't want to be very rude or vulgar, so I will not use any bad words or swear words. Probably I would do it if I were speaking in Hungarian. You know who these guys are, right? So the authoritarian playbook has actually become a thing in political research in the past many years. In this lecture or session, I will talk a bit about the Ground Truth Project, which is about comparing how in several increasingly authoritarian countries, free journalists have basically documented very similar patterns of how autocrats act and what steps they make. So that's going to be one part of this session. The authoritarian playbook is something that gives us an insight to this increased international collaboration. So as we are collaborating, I think Amnesty International is a pretty good example for global human rights collaboration. Well, the bad guys are doing the same, and yet they do it in very innovative ways. It's much different from what probably a previous generation was used to during the Cold War. It's more multilateral, it's more multifaceted, but they do coordinate internationally to share their tactics, resources, think about troll farms shared or the intervention of very obscure, very fishy online cyber attacks when it comes to elections in European countries from Russia, for example, just like a few months ago in Romania, for instance. These autocrats try to maintain power at all costs, so that's why they collaborate to resist democratic pressure. We are here to make sure that, they will not be able to do that forever, but still, that's just the grim picture we are now. As Jan Bessin, an American human rights lawyer, says, there are like different ways to recognize when it's an authoritarianism. They are a Trojan horse. They gain power through democratic or more or less democratic elections. And then there is this tendency to dismantle the democratic system from within once they gain power. A very clear example, I think, is Hungary in that sense. But probably you can recite others. There is a consistency in what steps they take, and it doesn't really matter where you look at, from Venezuela to Hungary or Turkey to Brazil. The thing is, as this is a scale, not all countries are as developed further into repression or autocracy as others, but as scientists and researchers document, there is a very clear sequence of steps that we can see. So that enables us to recognize patterns which are more or less common. what are the 7 steps? I think we've mentioned this, both Miklos and David, and also me. It's to politicize independent institutions as a first step, spreading misinformation, to kind of open up the debate, make a lot of noise, make it difficult to see what is for real. Expand executive power, that's about quashing the traditional separation of powers, and to, diminish the checks and balances. Quash dissent, that has also a very wide range of what do we exactly mean. You can also see in Hungary in the last year, for example, criminalizing, peaceful assemblies and making it a crime to organize such a thing. That's, again, a step forward, but it can be anything from, making it just difficult to speak up, or let alone arresting people who dare to say, Russia's aggression against Ukraine is a war, for saying that in Russia. It's also about targeting marginalized groups. We'll talk a bit about that, why that makes sense for these autocratic fellows. Corrupting elections, that's often a very clear sign of something is wrong when the elections are no longer free and fair. And again, Miklos has been an OSCE election monitor for many years, and just again speaking to my home city or country of birth, Hungary, this has been pretty much clear that the Hungarian elections are not fair in the past several occasions. And as a last step or resort, it's often to incite for violence, incitement for hatred, weaponizing aggression and tensions in the society, because usually these countries, as I've said earlier, people are not super happy with their lives. So sooner or later, some clashes would erupt in even the most oppressive regimes. How do these regimes function? Again, this is just a repetition. One of the key goals is to consolidate power at all costs. It means that it doesn't matter how much it takes, what the outlook is, what often international critics would say, these autocrats need to grab and hold on to power for themselves, for their families, their cronies, no matter the costs. There is an increased phenomenon researched by some. One example is Applebaum's work, but others also do that. There is a very tight control over economy. I think, and all corruption-related issues are quite clear, especially when we look at the Russian model of shell companies and, tax havens and how they are buying properties and how you can buy anonymously properties in, let's say, Trump's real estate businesses, or also the money flowing into the Gulf states. There is a very clear pattern how economy is a very important factor and booster of these countries, even at the cost of their natural resources and economies, like, for example, in Venezuela with the oil reserves. Most of these authoritarian regimes still use some traditional fear tactics. Again, it's a matter of a scale, right? In some countries, there is more repression, so it means you can have criminal prosecution or persecution in some cases for speaking up, while in other countries it's a softer base. But what we see is the aim is pretty clear for those people who are unhappy, who are critical, to make them feel that they could end up hurting themselves just for the sole act of speaking up. That is something that is very important from the activistic perspective when we talk about activism, whether we are afraid, whether there is fear in a society or not. And lastly, which is quite important and also very, very pertinent to our activism, is that these powers, these regimes want to keep people in apathy, as far away from politics as possible, to lose faith in democracy. If you look at the Russian mis- and disinformation campaigns, but also the way Viktor Orban, or like in the Netherlands, Geert Wilders talks about democracy, liberal democracy, the European Union, that's very negative. It's very derogatory. It's about, these are sick regimes, which are anyway dying. There is a decadence. So there is a very strong purpose to, make people believe that democracy is not worth the fight. By democracy, we also could understand human rights, which are pretty much the result of liberal democracies. But these new autocrats are pretty different from their old fellow dictators. And then we can talk a bit about, Miklos could speak much more about how it was to live under János Kádár, because it was only the first few years of my life. But I think when we think about Stalin or Hitler or Mussolini or Pol Pot or many others, they did have different tactics. We'll dig a bit deeper into why these countries were different. Modern hybrid regimes use spin tactics, and spin is not necessarily the spinning, but you go to the gym to get rid of your stress hormones. That's also very good for human rights defenders, actually. But I'm not here to promote physical education anymore. It's about tactics to reframe issues. So how can these spin doctors or propagandists reframe problems seen by the society to try to minimize the problems in the public opinion, so people don't really see that as a problem? Very clear. In a lot of countries, there are elections rigged. Information is manipulated, propaganda is spread. Often it's from Russia, but not exclusively, but still you see like a very nice ecosystem of misinformation spread from one country to another. These regimes, the hybrid regimes, often co-opt and suppress civil society that touches and affects the work of non-government organizations, either by the form of creating gongos or passing laws which label them foreign agents. We know the drill. Or by limiting free press and the rights of journalists to do their job. And then lastly, which we cannot deny, there is an effort to build real support for these regimes. And we cannot deny from time to time, these regimes are actually pretty popular if you look at trustworthy opinion polls still. But the basis of this support is often a foundation of hate, resentment and nationalism. So this is not necessarily the type of support that our organizations would want to work for. In her recent book, Applebaum basically gets together the elements of how this whole autocracy incorporation came to be. She describes it as a loose but very functional coalition of various companies. When they come together in an incorporation, it's like an agglomeration of minor authoritarian companies working together because of the global greed to make profits. Towards the second half of the Cold War, a lot of Western politicians and businessmen believed that change is possible through commerce. And here she quotes lots of German examples, and then adds also American examples of the West's misjudgment when it comes to the effect of trade, how economic changes would, bring on democratic changes. We see that it pretty much didn't happen, neither in Russia nor in Hungary, by the way. And how actually the export of democracies turned the other way around, according to Applebaum, because now authoritarian regimes are exporting their views, their anti-rights movements, their misogynistic, anti-gender ideology to liberal democracies. So it's like a boomerang effect. Pretty much not what political leaders were calculating in the 1980s and 90s. Even in the 2000s, she quotes like a speech from Bill Clinton, back then the US president, who said, oh, well, these fears that the internet can be used for something evil, these are ridiculous because internet will basically be the vehicle for democratization all over the world, even in China. 20 years forward, we see that this is pretty much not the case, especially when it comes to China. And also that kleptocracy, which is like the term for misappropriating public funds, assets, resources to these the cronies or proxies of these autocrats, is very lucrative for the West, because these hybrid regimes or authoritarian regimes are actually still connected to the world economy. So they do have their bank accounts, they have accountants, they have lawyers, they have consultants and advisors who are very often very prestigious Western firms and corporates who give advice, for the good money to the dark side as well. Now, what can we do? Applebaum comes up with a few ideas saying the West, the free world, should establish international anti-corruption alliance to kind of cut back on kleptocracy, which is globally spreading. This she imagines as something like a new international legal framework, like we know it with international human rights law or humanitarian law. Again, I'm not here to judge and get deeper into the realistic, whether this is a realistic plan or not now, but well, that's what she puts forward. Also very important to look into our own field, and that's why it's good to have a lot of non-Hungarian guests at this conference, because democracies must deliver results at home as well. Otherwise, it's not going to work. We have to reckon what's not working in the Western, so-called Western democracies as well. These regimes, the liberal democracies, have to decrease their economic dependency, like think about the Russian gas and oil and the German economy, or the same with rare minerals or semiconductors when it comes to the US economy and China's role. When it comes to public discourse, one very important point is to come back. We have to fight to get back to an evidence-based level of conversations. Fact-checking is not enough. A very swift reaction to fake news is not enough anymore. She gives ideas how trustworthy press agencies should make their, press feed available to countries for free, so that, for example, in a lot of African countries, it wouldn't be the Chinese news agency that is available for the journalists working there. So to really look into the relations between what is accessible and what is profitable for the West and make it a broader group or like make them globally available. And also, we need to mobilize and engage people to fight cynicism, because, as I've mentioned earlier, cynicism is one of the very important points where autocrats hope to quash activism forever. If people don't care anymore, nobody will come forward and, organize massive demonstrations or speak up. This is something where Applebaum also suggests that we have to take back the very emotive language of autocrats. Think about love, think about family, think about a lot of very deep values and emotions that we also hold dear, even if we are not sympathizing with authoritarianism. And she says the liberal world, and I would say civil society, has been dormant for several decades to really come back with a language of emotions and not only a language that speaks to our brain and minds. Another very interesting book is Treisman and Guriev's book on spin dictators. This is also depicting a scale between fear dictators and spin dictators. Fear dictators being the old school guys, like think Hitler, think Stalin, or Pol Pot, who were openly repressive, very violent. It was a matter of life and death. People were killed in mass when they didn't agree. Now it's more about manipulating information and trying to present themselves as the able, capable leader who's consolidated, wearing relatively nice suits. I mean, if it's not for Orban, because he's unable to dress up properly, honestly. Now I look at him, it's awful. But I mean, if you look at former politicians from the former Polish government, or a lot of people, I mean, they're wearing slim suits, right? Instead of terrorizing people, it's to fool them, it's to mislead them. It's a very different toolkit, according to Treisman and Guriev. It's more sophisticated matters that are needed now, because it's a more complex knowledge economy. Because these countries where hybrid regimes work, many of the countries we actually live in still, are connected to the world economy. So they don't want to close their system, their countries. It's not anymore like, it was in the 20th century, the first half especially. They want to be a part of it. They want to profit. They want, their kleptocracy to thrive. And then the last example is the Democracy Undone, the Authoritarian's Playbook project, which again lists these steps. And I know you're getting probably a bit dizzy with all these steps and words. It's pretty much the same, from weaponizing fear to undermine institutions, exploit religion where it's relevant. It's not going to be that relevant everywhere, but exploit the majority against the minority, target the outsiders, make them blamed for economic difficulties and the rise of the costs of living. You can see it with migrants and refugees in Europe a lot, but elsewhere as well. Rewrite history. That's amazing. That's to make people believe that it wasn't actually how it happened. It's about monopolizing knowledge and education. Divide and conquer, it's the tactics for sowing polarization and dissent, and also to erode the truth, so that's a lot about fake news. What do we feel on our skin? A lot. I mean, we can see and feel it everywhere, right? I'm just gonna list a few aspects of our daily lives where we are affected. But please, at the comment section very soon, come forward and add if you have anything else to say, because I'm sure it's a very colorful picture. We have slap suits to silence critiques in some countries, surveillance, massive. It's also like a great Chinese expert. Also, we do have corruption and nepotism in most of these countries. The distorted media landscape, scapegoating minorities and or women, othering, that leads to xenophobia, racism, sexism, etc., whatnot. You can continue this raw. And also we do have anti-NGO laws, measures, and campaigns. So this is pretty much where we are operating. It does affect our work because we are often labeled as foreign agents, as David and Miklos already mentioned. How to challenge that, right? We are not foreign agents. We want just a fair society to live in. Often, there is an open defiance of international human rights treaties and systems, very often questioned by Russia or China. We face smear campaigns which aim at alienating civil society from people, so that as if we were not, together, as if we wouldn't share the same values, as if we wouldn't work together for each other. And also keeping NGOs on edge to focus on the reaction instead of shaping and creating the news. That's a very powerful tactic, which I'm sure many of you in the room can talk a lot about how much of your time is devoted to challenge nonsense, crazy, stupid information spread about you and your organizations. This is a very, iconic moment of the Polish women's strike movement, one of their demonstrations during COVID time. You can see the face masks. It's not all hopeless, although we know Poland is a very interesting example now, what comes after the peace government. And just to close by, some ideas what we can do, and this is the part where Steffi will be speaking much more about concrete tactics, but try to state what you are for and not what you're against. We do have this tendency, as David said, like we are very critical. We always blame and point fingers. Who are the bad guys? Let's say what we believe in, why we're doing this job so passionately. Really try to believe in the power that we can change things. I know after endless, unsuccessful advocacy missions and submissions and strategic litigation, it can be very disheartening, but we must preserve this faith. And I think activism is the best way to do that, actually. Listen more, talk less. I mean, I talk a lot now, but it's just for your sake. But no, it's actually to listen to the people we want to engage and, make them as passionate as we are, or at least somewhat closer to that. Be credible. Look at ourselves, look at our own values and put that forward. Show what we have in common with, the people that are outside of our bubble. We do have a lot. Sometimes it's hard to admit, but we actually do have a lot. And tell our stories. People love stories. So, it's a bit of a catchy marketing thingy, but it does work. We have seen several occasions at the Dutch Amnesty section where we support initiatives where this actually worked. One is a very prominent example from Hungary. I think you will hear about that later in these 2 days. There was a joint campaign from Hungarian civil society coordinated by Amnesty Hungary and Háttér LGBT Association and supported by 12 other NGOs, which was focused at getting moderate voters at the 2022 completely ridiculous referendum on child protection, which was basically very heavily transphobic with led questions. The approach was easy, get out of our bubble. People are already at the voting booth. It was organized at the same time as the national parliamentary election. So these organizations needed to get people to kind of get the hint of why is it problematic to label trans people. So it was to get allies and family members to talk about their loved ones on the basis and aligning with their values of, the importance of family and also to care for the safety of their loved ones. It's very cheesy. It's not very militant. It's not what, Amnesty would do or most of the LGBT plus organizations would do. But that was something that was validated by focus groups, by audience research, to have a neutral, toned, family-oriented, inclusive campaign where those people could join who are otherwise not part of the big LGBT plus movement. It was a successful campaign. The referendum was invalidated. Congrats, it was a huge success. I think one of the biggest ones in Hungary. Another quick example, and that's the time is up for me, is Amnesty Poland's voter mobilization campaign ahead of the last election in 2023. Some people in the room were a part of designing that campaign, like Dani from the Europe Regional Office, but that's also a joint initiative where different Amnesty parts could come together to come up with a very targeted campaign that Amnesty Poland led to focus on apolitical young women in small towns, in rural areas, who are not very, motivated to vote. If they do, then they were mostly following their male family members. So if it was let's vote PiS, then it was, a vote for PiS. So the approach was to really claim back the narrative and the imagery of a happy family life where people trust each other, and young women who decided that they underwent the termination of their pregnancy are still accepted, loved, and supported. So that was a very colorful, sunny, Sunday lunch with the family where even the grandpa said, my daughter or my granddaughter, no matter, what you do and how you decide, you're still, our loved one. It was to kind of break down the taboo that in these rural Polish communities is still very strong. It was a friendly, open-toned conversation with conversational cards developed. It's something similar that the Irish abortion referendum campaign worked on. So Amnesty Ireland and other partners had conversational toolkits, really debunking the abbreviations, the very non-inclusive language of often these movements where people outside of the bubble feel just simply stupid to speak up. This helped a lot to mobilize women who were otherwise quite inactive politically. And it was a very good lesson learned because the Polish Civil Society Alliance basically distributed and divided the different target audience segments among them. Amnesty focused for one, and then a lot of other movements, Abortion Dream Team, or the Women's Strike, and others focused on different groups of women living in different setups, more urban settings, more cosmopolitan ones. Thank you very much. I hope I kept the time frame. Okay. So I think now we do have a short moment to reflect a bit on this rush that I just provided you with.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bálint Farkas from Civilization Coalition, and in the spirit of fighting apathy, questions.
Én Bogyai Katalin Jusztina vagyok a Connect Europe Egyesülettől, és nekem az lenne a kérdésem, hogy nagyon jó volt az előadás, viszont amivel mi is nagyon sokat küzdünk, és szerintem nem mi vagyunk az egyetlen olyan civil szervezet Magyarországon, akinek ez problémája. Magyarországon van egy nagyon komoly olyan úgymond szavazóbázis, egy olyan gondolkodásmódot képviselő bázis, akik az idősebb generációból kerülnek ki. Az idősebb generációt meggyőzni az ifjabb generációnak, tehát mondjuk az Z-seknek, Y-osoknak, talán az X-eseken keresztül valamennyire sikerül, de annyira nagyon kevés eszköz van a kezünkbe ahhoz, hogy az idősebb generációnak rávilágítsunk bizonyos dolgokra. Nagyon nehéz ezt áthidalni. Próbálunk mintákat követni más országokból, de annyira specifikus a mi helyzetünk, ugye posztkommunista ország vagyunk, teljesen más problémákkal küzdenek az itteni emberek, mint mondjuk Norvégiába, tehát a skandináv országokba, vagy tőlünk akár nyugatabbra. Nem igazán találunk erre megfelelő mintákat, és nagyon jó lenne olyan kapaszkodókat kapni, amikkel dolgozni tudnánk a jövőben.
Thank you so much for this extremely, this just massive amount of information and inspiration. It was really, really great to hear. And I think the silence that you're feeling is just because this was so much to reflect upon. So try to take it as a compliment. One reflection. I think that you're ending up with a massive challenge. And yes, I'm Ingrid, Amnesty Norway. Yeah, the country in the top there. No, you're ending up with a massive challenge to us as I can speak for Amnesty International in the ways we communicate. I mean, we're used to communicating with out of principles, with a lot going on up here, with our brains, with facts, and with quite a lot of anger as well. Or passion, but passion we know is often mistaken as anger. So are we doing it all wrong? That is my question to you. And that is something that I get to discuss the coming days.
Just to continue the Scandinavian streak, I'm from Amnesty International Denmark. And thank you very much for your presentation. I recognize a lot of it, and also in Denmark, unfortunately, even though we are at the top compared to so many other countries, we see some of the same things going on in Danish politics. My question is that I'm a minority in Denmark, so I feel this, a lot more than the majority, even inside of Amnesty. It's difficult for the majority Danes to understand what is going on because the 80% are all right, but the 20% are not. So it creates, a hole between, a cliff between the majority and the minority. And I would like some ideas on how to address that. Because I think that is going to be one of the challenges for us, is actually convincing the majority that something is going on and it's not very good. And when you compare it with the other countries in Europe, you can actually see the patterns of the authoritarian playbook, even in Denmark. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think it's good enough. Is it okay if I answer in English? Or it's okay? Okay, thanks. So then, as for how to get to the older generations, I think a lot can be learned. It's a matter of investment, actually. And that's my very brutal and honest answer. We see in some of the examples, and that's a bit an answer to all the three comments and questions. If we do dig deeper into who do we want to talk to and engage, bring onto our side, in a way, as if there are sides, but there are sides, unfortunately. If you really get to learn their patterns, where you can influence them, that could be done, even with older generations. Then the problem is that these are really costly research exercises to do a proper values and audience research. We have been experimenting with that in the Dutch Amnesty section, some together with Amnesty Hungary, some together with other organizations. From where the money comes from and where the knowledge comes from, I think that's the most tricky part, but it's also something solvable. Because if you really do have a profile of people, like imagine it as a 3, 4, or even 5D profile of people's feelings, lifestyle choices, what kind of influences are they open to, then you can get a pretty good profile. And working on that profile, you will actually see how exactly can you choose your message, your messenger, which narrative will work with that target group. I think often what we forget is the need for fitting into the worldview of the target audience if it's beyond our bubble. So we just say, this is wrong, we are right, da-da-da-da-da. Fine, but that person is imagine it as if looking at watching a completely different TV channel. I mean, back the times when there were TVs and channels, but still, and that person who is outside of our usual frame does not understand the same words, the same notions would not mean the same thing for that person. That's often a generational gap, but not exclusively. It can be political affiliation, different types of grouping. But what we've done, we work together with some big research agencies who do this kind of market research for civil society. One of them is a Dutch company called Glocalities. They are great. We've been working with them. They are just expensive. You need to have like 20,000 euros to do this. Although if you have that once, you can really invest, getting a tailor-made research with very, very detailed values and archetypes and influence tactics. you can use it for many, many years because values don't change as quick as, political trends do. But I agree, that's a thing where to get, or how can civil society be equipped with that knowledge so we're not reliant on external knowledge to channel into our work. But we can talk a bit about that. I'm happy to expand a bit more. For the sake of time and coming back to the questions, I think I agree. Who am I to say Amnesty is doing something wrong? But if you ask me probably a smaller setup, I would say we're doing pretty, a lot of things wrong. And we do have good initiatives to go, more out to the people, to face the reality, meet people where they are. And that I mean by a much stronger engagement and activism to go out and do sensing, talk to people that we would never talk to because they are not sitting in the meeting rooms. If we talk to these people, and now I'm very generalistic, forgive me for that, but often people are driven by their emotions when they make even political choices. That's a key. It has become an axiomatic thing. When Amnesty International and most of these other big human rights watchdog organizations were founded, we still did not believe this. We thought, well, political people are rational beings who can be persuaded with facts, with legal arguments, and then that's going to bring, an enjoyment of human rights further. And we see with these spin doctors, with these semi-dictators whom I've been talking a lot about, they actually woke up first. If you read Lakoff's book, Don't Think of an Elephant, there he also makes this statement. Hell, we have to learn from the Republicans who already realized decades ago that they have to monopolize family, tradition, so many notions that are the closest to the heart of every person. It doesn't matter if, someone votes right or left. We all want to be safe. We all want our children and family members and loved ones to be happy. We want to have a fulfilling life. So then the question is, how can Amnesty be true to itself while transforming some of its messaging into something more resonating on a very emotional level to connect deeper? And I believe we can do that. Some of the examples show it. And I believe in the next day when there is the Amnesty meeting, a lot of examples and discussions will be brought up. But there is a fear in human rights organizations, Amnesty included, that if we deviate from our usual way of talking about human rights, we will lose our base. Now, I think this is a myth, and this is a legitimate fear, but this is not something that would, crack down Amnesty International or anyone else. But that's a risk we have to take. It's a leap we have to make. But I believe the success or the potential success is so much more persuasive than staying away from these newer ways of talking about human rights that we actually have to do, and also because of these guys. And the last question, I think it's a bit about, I forgot to say exactly the far-right movements, which are not so far-right anymore because we see them more and more mainstreamed in parliaments, in national parliaments and governments, exactly. But what you see in Denmark, what you see in Sweden, the Netherlands, and elsewhere, Italy, a lot of these far-right movements are funded by these autocrats and these bad guys. So actually, there is this very tangible, palpable trend in better established liberal democracies. I believe when it's a minority versus majority dilemma, one thing is that if we want to promote the rights of minorities for the sake of equality and inclusion, because of this shift in our messaging, how we talk about human rights, we have to adopt the majoritarian perspective. And I know it's very, very contentious, and we can discuss it, and we can have very passionate debates if it's the right way to do. But convincing someone from the majority that, the minority issues are their own core problems in their lives, that's in this climate, with these polarized opinions, with fake news, with misinformation, it's almost impossible. I believe we have to do the other way around, find the overlaps, commonalities. And we do have some good partners, like More in Commons, for example, or others have lots of initiatives to try to, get the overlap between the mainstream, the majoritarian viewpoint, and the minorities. That's a second question to this, how you deal with your own, minority circles. Because that's going to be painful for a lot of partner organizations, grassroots, if you say, look, we need to talk about this issue that way because we want to build a majority support for that cause. It doesn't mean we don't accept you, but it's a pragmatic decision to be made, and that's not easy, and it can be very political. Political, I mean, within the civil society. But that's why we're here, right? Thank you very much for your attention.